Veggie.
I've turned the recorder back on for our call. So, thank you for coming on to that last call with us, Japan. That was good.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Do you want to continue with that, or do you want to go off in some other direction?
Well, do you know what is so interesting? It's just all, sometimes when you're into something, when you've got something on the mind, everything you hear relates to it. So
Mm-hmm.
that dropping the weapon, letting down the banner, unbolting the door. What was the fourth one?
Filling in the trench.
Filling in the trench. It's all, for me, I hear that and I just think self and non-self. It's just like letting down the barriers that we build to create a sense of self, because we think that we're safer and more secure if we build up this quite rigid, fixed identity. And then actually it's the opposite, and that the real freedom comes through giving it away and knocking it down and letting it go.
Uh-huh.
Which, I mean, because this is sort of all we've been speaking about for the last month. I apologize if my phone calls are getting really tediously repetitive.
No. In fact, that's the whole point, Matt, is that uh, this is this is actually part of the training that's been known for quite a long time for friends to get together and keep talking Dhamma with each other, because every time we talk about it, it goes a little deeper and a little deeper.
Mm.
That in fact, I've gotten quite a lot of Dhamma by talking about Dhamma on the internet. That is really, really valuable for me. You think you're getting something out of it. Wait until you see, I mean, you ain't seen nothing yet. Because that's what I've gotten to. I've gotten a whole lot of nothing.
Good. I had on Saturday, I did on a kind of practice level, something which I haven't done before and which has been quite interesting in relation to this ongoing conversation. So I did a day-long retreat, like 12 hours or so, around self-inquiry. So very much within a, not, although the kind of teacher, the facilitator, was aware of kind of more non-Buddhist perspective and practice traditions, it was very much based within Buddhist ideas of emptiness and non-self, and using self-inquiry as a tool and means to explore that.
Okay.
And it was very interesting, I have to say. And actually, it was interesting since then. My practice, like the kind of returning to the kind of the practice that I'm more used to, and anapanasati, but kind of infusing it with that inquiry has been really, really rich. So basically, it to kind of
Go ahead.
The practice that was sort of outlined and that I did for that day was, who am I? And then something quite interesting happens, and I've not really seen, I've never done a practice that does this before, and I think it's what happens in koan practice as well. It's like you ask and it reminds me of like that metaphor about a thorn to remove a thorn. It's like you ask something using your thinking mind, but somehow it's like it's like asking that question and then being receptive to a kind of non-knowing, to the answer.
And the question is, who am I?
Yeah. It just seems to like open up this, open you up into a kind of like, into a samadhi, like into a state of just this kind of bright, clear space. And then you're in that bright, clear space, and then a thought pops in. And then it's kind of like, well, who thought that thought? So it's not, you don't kind of stick to that who am I question rigidly. it's like you ask that to kind of get your foot in the door, to kind of shut down the kind of gears of the mind body enough to kind of open it up. And then a sensation arises, and it's like, okay, well, what is that sensation? Who's feeling that sensation? And then you realize that that's a thought that you've had. It's like, who asked that thought? And you basically, it takes you on this, my experience of it was kind of going on this journey of kind of seeing basically the aggregates arise and pass, feeling form, feeling perception, kind of having a more bare consciousness of something, seeing thoughts and the Jita Sankharas, and just seeing all of these things emerge, and just going on this like almost like eternal regression through it all. So kind of going from here to here to here, and all these little thoughts that seem to be a self, but then you realize that because actually they've become an object in the mind, it's not the self, it's a kind of object. And you just kind of keep going, and it expands, and that...
I have a question now.
Yeah.
And that is because I have talked to other people who have some experience with it. This sounds like you're making it closer to what you already know about the Dhamma, and that you're using that to reaffirm that which you already know. But that there's other ways that people experience this, who am I, in a completely different way than the way that you're describing it.
Well, let me finish off, and then tell me, because
okay.
It went in two halves. Like the first few hours of practice, it was very much like this, what I was describing. And I suppose it almost felt like a little bit of a like noticing practice. It's like you're noticing everything kind of arise, and you're applying, and you're
right.
seeing.
That's actually quite excellent. Most people, in fact, will use who am I as an archaeological expedition into personality, which means they just get stuck into a state of hindrances.
Yes, no, it wasn't. It felt very blissful, kind of seeing these things, seeing what they were and what they were not. And what they are is a very briefly arising thing that then passes. And that builds up a momentum, and it builds a lot of satisfaction and pity, and it became like that. And then the kind of second half of the day, it was just like everything expanded enormously, and all of those thoughts no longer, all of those sensations and feelings and perceptions and thoughts and ideas and voices, it's like none of them carried any stickiness, or it was like the idea that any of them was a self, or that any of them should be taken too seriously or too personally, had been revealed as being so outlandish and ridiculous, because they were seen as being this series of things that arise and pass without you choosing. It's not like you notice something because you choose to notice something, or you think something because you choose to think something. It's actually what was very insightful, and I hadn't really experienced before, was just how I suppose you could say like conditioned everything is, or like a thought comes without you choosing to think it. Or let's say you deliberately say, I want to think a thought, because you say, I'm going to ask a question, or whatever it is. It's like even that volition comes from a previous condition. And you suddenly in this process, I lost all sense of a kind of like central doer or thinker or breather or decider. It just seemed like actually the things which we confuse for self, the perceptions, they come and they go, and you're not in control of that process. And then at that point,
the most important word is process.
Yes.
There's no you in there. At any stage along the game, there is no you, but the process is there.
Yes. And even process is too much. It's like processes. It's like plural. Mm-hmm. And actually the plural aspect was quite a big aspect of it, like the sense of like the multiplicity of the self. Because like a thought comes, and then another thought responds to it. And then it's like these two things, and the way that within you know, like the Walt Whitman poem, like I contain multitudes. You know that line. It's, you really get that sense sometimes of how those multitudes exist within something which we conveniently.
The Buddha would talk about it as, look how fast the mind is.
Vast. It contains everything. It's like it contains everything you could imagine it to contain, or you could imagine, you know, that you can conceive of. But then, anyway, then once the experiential.
Then why can't people imagine and conceive of being happy?
But this is the wonderful thing. Then within that kind of like within that lighter, more kind of sense of mind from coming at it from that more like empty perspective, like seeing it as not a fixed thing, but seeing it as something that can take on many forms. You then get to you then get to shape it, don't you? You then get to say like, right, well, if you know this mind contains multitudes, can do, feel, be anything that the human mind can think of, why not cultivate joy? Why not cultivate loving kindness, etc.? But anyway, just to kind of finish the report, it ended, or in the second half of it, just all of these things became so much less sticky. All of these arisings and passings just stopped really grabbing any attention, and it just expanded and expanded into this into a state which I'm not unfamiliar with from the practice already. It was just, and what that's also another interesting thing for me is experimenting with something which in theory is a very different type of practice, but actually realizing that they are different pointers and different ways in to exploring the same thing.
Precisely. Okay. One way of saying it is that the intention is to give an experience to another, but we do not know how to give. We cannot speak in experience. We speak in concepts. So I have to give you a set of concepts that if you understand the concepts the way that I explain them, in the way that I'm explaining my own experience, I create concepts. I tell you about those concepts, and if you understand that language, you can unpack it so that you can have that same experience. Where another one who's trying to give you that experience will give you a completely different set of metaphors and approaches, but he's trying to teach you that same experience, which can be then understood to be at one-ment, or to be actually at a part of this enormous flood of reality that's happening all the time that we normally don't tap into. Because we're thinking,
and all of that flood, we just take the bits which are relevant to prop up our little sense of self, and actually, if we
exactly,
and if we knock down the walls and fill in the moat, and then we can actually expand, and that expansion is so wonderful. It's so joyous. It's such a kind of beautiful thing.
It's unbelievably, and therefore is unmentionably.
Yes.
It cannot be spoken of, and that's the problem. The Tao that can be said is not the Tao.
Yeah.
We can't talk about it, and so giving one that experience is very hard because we can't even speak about it.
Yeah.
But it does have a few indications, like the word universe or universal, or at one-ment, or joining with it, or be here now. These are all ways of describing it, but these are concepts. And it's hard to give the student the actual experience. And so, who am I is one of the ways of tapping into that. But basically, it's actually the same thing as aha, I see you, Mara. It's the same practice. What is this? What the hell? You know, it's just that.
Yeah.
That's the Navy version of saying it.
What the hell?
Yeah. The Marines say something else.
It was very interesting. This morning I had a really lovely sit, and it was going through the kind of the steps of anapanasati. But it was interesting. But as I sat down, before anything else, I asked like, that sense of inquiry and about sort of investigation of the construct of self stayed throughout all the steps. So with the first tetrad, and breathing into the body and experiencing the body and calming the body, it was all of those things, but with just the investigative dial was just turned up higher than it usually is.
Great, that's good. I'm glad that, yeah, that's an important part, is to begin that investigation. That is, in fact, a really good way of understanding right view, is to begin to investigate. Look at what's going on. That question, what the hell? That's the question. Keep asking that and keep living it. Keep looking at what's going on. But we have to remember to do that. And so that's the trick, is get into that state where we can keep asking that question a lot.
Yes. But it was interesting. The relationship between, say, investigating and calm abiding, or investigating and abiding, or investigation and samadhi. And when one is good, the other is good, right? Like they are so mutually, you could say dependently co-arising. Like they.
Yes.
Yeah, that was the other thing actually that was very apparent during that investigation, was like how the parts that we think of as the self, like the co-arising nature of them. So it's like sensation and consciousness. It's like if you could try and separate them, but you can't really. Like in the actual looking at it, you can't separate the sensation from the consciousness of the sensation.
That's correct. In fact, the consciousness of the sensation is the sensation.
Yes. And there are other things, and that's interesting. That's
what kind of sensation is a sensation if you're not conscious of it?
It's the sound of one hand clapping.
That's good.
And then also like but that's interesting. Dependent origination and time is interesting, because the sensation and the consciousness of sensation, you see the kind of dependent arising of those things, and they're happening. You can't separate them in time, right? Like you can't say, well, now there's the sensation, and then a moment later there's the consciousness of the sensation.
That's the problem with concepts, is that it takes ourselves a whole lot longer to say something than it does to experience it.
Yeah. But then there were other things that arose in that kind of investigative space that I would describe as like dependently co-arising, but they happen over time. So for example, the meditative process, for example, like choosing to follow the breath, or choosing to like lean into joy, or choosing to shift from a kind of coarser physical rushy type of joy into a stiller, calmer joy, for example. These are things which, like, the process of anapanasati trains one in. As you go through those steps, it's almost got the sense in this investigation that, like, just because those things might be separated in time, like one moment I'm doing this and the next moment I'm doing this, there is still a kind of like dependent arising in terms of how they relate to each other, because it's like you get into a groove and you move through a habit pattern, and the first step kind of leads to the next, or even something like walking downstairs and for example, when I finish this phone call, I will go downstairs and I will make a cup of tea because that's what I do every time after I finish a phone call with you, and also before I leave the house, because I'm going to go and spend the day with my kids. So that go on.
To follow on with that, if you don't go down and fix yourself a cup of tea after this phone call, how will you feel?
I'll feel fine, and I probably it's fun to play with it, but it's also fun to appreciate that those grooves exist, right?
Right. But here's the point that I'm making, because some people, in fact, will have gotten already that groove so much that if they don't do that ritualized routine, then they feel that they should have done that ritualized routine. And so that'll use that as a source of bad feelings. That's why I brought it up, is because the last call that you weren't, the first part of it was that very thing, a cup of tea. People in London tend to do that. Some people miss it and feel good, and others miss it and feel bad. That's the kind of ritual it is. I bet there is at one time or another you could have been feeling bad or felt bad or a twinge when you missed a cup of tea.
Yes, I could have gone, oh, it's really unfair today. I haven't had time to do the things I need to do to feel okay. Yeah.
Exactly.
But also, it's very interesting. And also, I could have done the same thing about practice. Like that's something I feel like, like a year ago, 18 months ago, if I didn't have the time that I wanted in the morning to practice, that would really annoy me. Which it's such an absurdity, isn't it? It's like losing the bigger picture. But it also made me realize that like a lot of the sense of self is it's a momentum caused by those habits.
Yes. And we can eventually come out of the habits. We are not that old personality that we have developed.
Yes. And we can retrain those habits.
We can retrain.
Also, like meditation, for example, is a sort of habit training.
Yes, and if you're practicing correctly, then you are training in the habits that you want to have. If you're not training correctly, then your training is at a certain time of day, I'm supposed to squat on the floor and look like this for a while. And if I don't do that, I'll feel bad. As opposed to if we're actually practicing correctly in our meditation, including remembering to take a deep breath and smile, you can do that whether you're sitting on the floor or not.
Yeah.
And so the squatting on the floor ritualized thing can actually, when we miss it, lead to suffering, or it can lead to joy. Your choice. And if we're attached to it, then that's the old way of living. That's part of our personality. And people do. They develop a personality that includes sitting meditation, so that when they can't do it, they feel bad.
Yeah.
Because they're supposed to do it. This is all part of what Freud talks about as the superego.
Yes.
We're supposed to do things that are good for us. So if you don't do the things that are good for us, and that's the logic, but that's the logic of a child.
Yeah, and then people get into a lot of self-worth and stuff, don't they? Especially around meditation. It's like, oh no, I've got no discipline, or I'm a lazy person, or I've got no resolve, I've got no will because I
and all of those are hindrances.
Yes.
And all of those are victimhood positions.
Yeah, absolutely. But then, so that's a certain habit pattern. But then another habit pattern for someone else could be the opposite. It could be just being very lazy, right? I'm trying to think of a slightly less kind of loaded phrase than that, but like
no motivation, or why bother, or it doesn't really matter, it doesn't have that much value in it, which is
yeah,
just another real way of saying the last time I did it, I didn't do it correctly, and therefore I got no benefit, and therefore why do it again? Why bother?
yeah,
Okay. That's actually what is generally referred to as sloth
yeah,
or
with
laziness.
some doubt mixed in as well, right? Because if
Got
it's like
doubt mixed right in there, right? These things are not pure.
yeah, but
And
then
it's
it's
also got just a little bit of aversion built into it. And naturally, it also has a quality of wanting something you don't have, or you wouldn't have even tried meditation in the first place. So, yeah, these hindrances are, boy, are they interconnected.
mm,
Leads us into actually a brick wall because these are just individual bricks in the wall, but
mm,
they're all directly connected together
mm.
strongly.
And once again, to go back to the thorn to remove a thorn metaphor, it's like we need to hijack almost the selfing process. We need to hijack the momentum, the sankhara. Like we need to build positive habits, and we
Mm-hmm.
need to build positive um, so almost like we need to build a positive self-view and positive habit patterns before we can let go of it, right? Like completely.
I would say yes, but both sides of that is a process,
Yeah.
okay, which is in fact the quality of changing itself in the sense of as one moves through things, they're moving both away from the old habits and moving into the way of the new habits. It's all the same kind of process.
Yes.
It's like moving a car down the street. It's moving away from that street down there and it's moving towards this one at the same uh, pace.
Yeah.
And so it depends upon which way are you looking. Are you looking at the car coming or are you looking at the car going?
Yeah.
Okay, so in that regard, is basically the same thing. That as we train in new habits, the old habits, you can actually go to the point of saying that when old habits start to die out, that means the associated neurons with those begin to die off through lack of need and lack of use, while you're spawning the birth of new neurons that
Mm-hmm.
are in fact in the new habit pattern that we want to develop. You
Mm.
see, many years ago, the neuroscientists thought that the mind was kind of fully developed by the age of 5, and they kept changing it and changing it and changing it, and recognizing no, the mind is actually a dynamic thing, and that right throughout life we continue to develop new nerve cells based upon new learning. But
Yeah.
the danger is for us to stop learning.
Yeah. It is. I find that all very. What's it called? The mycelium. The it's a certain coating, neural pathways develop, and then through repetition, they develop this coating which allows the electrical current to move through that same channel stronger and stronger and easier and easier and stronger and easier.
Excellent way of saying it, precisely.
But you really like meditation is, especially something like anapanasati or the steps of it, which does have that kind of sequential process, which is something that I often really enjoy. Like there are certain sits, I've described this to you before, where it's like I mean, I don't actually drive a car, so this isn't a really very natural metaphor for me to use, but like driving like a sports car where you're moving the gears smoothly as you kind of go from one speed and gear to another, and it just seems to like move through these different paces really beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes with anapanasati, as you move from within a tetrad and between tetrads, you get that kind of smooth, natural, easeful transition as you're experiencing the piti, and then on an exhale, you kind of drop it and feel into the sukha, and it just, it can feel like this very lovely smooth thing. You get the sense that is very much like these grooves in the mind that you're creating and strengthening.
Yes. You see, that's one of the things that people have an idea that an example would be, what is first jhana? And they do not understand that this first jhana that the Buddha is talking about is actually a natural kind of state. And that what it means is that we have the ability to really focus in on and paying attention to something that's in the here now, as opposed to daydreaming and not paying attention to anything. Okay, so that's the basic point, and humans do that on a natural basis all the time. But a lot of kids wind up daydreaming in school because they're not getting any pleasure out of it. Okay, and so the daydreaming winds out being pleasurable, but sometimes the kids are accused of being daydreaming in class, where in fact they're looking out the window and they find something really curious and interesting, maybe even educational out there going on, and they're not paying attention to what's going on in the head or in the classroom. They're out in the real world, but they're doing it vicariously. So we have to understand then that we may not know what's going on in anybody else's mind. We can only begin to understand how our own mind works, recognizing that everybody's mind works kind of the same way, but that doesn't mean that we know anybody else's mind. But there's a lot of signals in what not to use. But meanwhile, this quality of learning how to be here now is something that is not really taught in school.
It is in my class. we have I've got like a really nice little meditation chime. We do sitting still and being here now in like short doses that they actually enjoy.
Great. That's great. I'm glad to hear that. That's not the usual classroom environment, but it's good that and in fact, I think that if you keep practicing and doing that, that it will become more common. I really see that humanity can come out of our old ways of doing things. We're in fact doing that, what with fits and starts. But humanity can come out of religion. We don't need religion. Religion, in fact, they point out the disadvantages of it, along with the fact that religion originally had some reason and purpose, and there were some advantages to it. So let's see if we can find what advantages there are, which in fact is everyone suffers, and we know we're suffering, and we're trying to look for a way out of that. That's what, in fact, is like in Muslim, it has pride and submission. In Christianity, it's sin and forgiveness. But we're all looking, and then dukkha and dukkha nirodha. So in fact, it's all really the same thing as a human state or a human condition, and we don't really have to even, in fact, change everybody from Buddhist or into Buddhist from whatever religion. That every religion itself has the right stuff right at the core if the people will investigate it. Here's an example. That I've got a Muslim friend who we were on a call when an Islamist came up to him out on the street because he was out there trying to be away from his family, and the Islamist walked up to him, tried to take his cell phone away from him to find out what he was doing. And he says that in Tunisia that they've got like that they're out there on the street policing things. And so I had the idea, well, why don't you do it like this? When these guys are behaving that way, then we can ask him, would Allah approve of what you are doing? Because the answer will always be that Allah is merciful, Allah will forgive. But you see, now he's walked right into the trap. Why? Because if Allah means that you have to get forgiveness from what you're doing, that means that Allah actually does not approve of what you're doing. And that if you were in fact going to submit to Allah, then what you're actually doing by being an Islamist is by practicing pride. You're not actually being submissive to God. You're prideful about it. And so if you want to be in accordance with the will of Allah, then you have to recognize when you're harming people, because Allah would not approve of you harming people, coming up on the street and taking their cell phone and things like this. And so this is the way. And you see, we don't even have to talk about Buddhism at all. We're talking about right at the depth of the religion is good behavior and bad behavior and what is approved of through our society and other things like this. At least at that level, what we're talking about is dukkha nirodha, to come out of it, to recognize what we're doing is harmful and stop doing it. And that is the basis of every religion. But what makes the religions different is not only the vocabulary, but all the various magic that's brought in to try to solve that issue of how can we, in fact, twist the thing around so that what I actually want to do is considered right. So I can feel good about my wrongdoing.
Yeah.
Which is in Buddhism, we think of that as just the wrong view of thinking I can get away with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one more point then is that, but the other side of religion is, no, wait a minute, you can't get away with it. You got to follow the rules. You will get caught eventually. Only then will you get mercy, but before you got to get caught first. And so this is what the Buddha then would talk about as ordinary right view. So wrong view is I can get away with it. Right view is, oh no, you can't. You're going to get caught. And those are the rules that we have. We keep telling ourselves what to do out of our ordinary right view. But ultimately, noble right view is, no, look at what you're doing. Let's do an investigation. What the heck is going on here? And you're using it in the sense of, who am I? Rather than in the sense of what's going on. Because what's going on takes us immediately right into looking at the process of what's going on, rather than looking for this, who am I, this I that's in there someplace. And because some people come to the point that there is an I in there. But basically, if we attend wisely to the Four Noble Truths, we come to understand there's no self in there.
Well, the process was, as I said, it was like this astonishing regression. Any moment that there's something which one could contract around as an I, it immediately is revealed as non-existent, or
right,
as it arises and passes, and it changes over time. Like even if you feel into something stably, like you feel into one perception or one sort of consciousness stably for a while, you realize that apparent stability is, upon investigation, like it's like a candle, right? Like candle looks like it's one flame burning, but actually it's coming into existence.
It's not, right? It's constantly a process. Okay, yes. But see, here's part of the point that I was trying to make before, but maybe I can say it better now, is that in going into that kind of class, you brought already a set of skills that were somewhat developed.
Yeah.
So that you could come to that, to where people who have no skills, when they start asking, who am I, they wind up with different answers based upon the levels of ignorance that they have. So congratulations, you actually got out of that class what was intended, but it's not a beginner's question.
No, I can see that. I can see how you need to be able to have enough, you need to have kind of charted that terrain enough to be able to kind of see things, for things to have started to unstick a bit, right? Like you need to be able to see you need to be able to kind of observe the arisings and passings, and to do that there needs to be some samadhi and there needs to be some experience with it, because otherwise it could feel like there are a self there.
Exactly. Okay. I like your concept of sticky. And this is what I mean by that. That when we have a state of sukha, and we can be in that state, then that's almost like a Teflon state. So when these feelings arise, they don't stick to us. We can say, I see you. I can see that. Okay.
Yeah.
And it keeps it coming. And so we're talking with a slightly different language, but we're talking about exactly the same thing.
Well, that's the other thing that I've noticed a lot about the like more insight practices and more samadhi practices, and they are like, it's such a subtle difference of emphasis, but like essentially a state of any samadhi, a state of any like being here now, you need to let go of a lot of self to be here now, because if you're holding on to self, you're holding on to a construct, you're not here now.
Right, exactly. And that self is a piece and part of the past. It's part of the sankara. It's the sewer itself, in fact.
Yeah. So if you're doing a practice which is deliberately deconstructing or investigating with a view towards deconstruction, essentially, it will lead you to being here now. So you're getting to the same place. Whereas if you're doing a practice which is more geared towards being here now, well, you're not going to get here now unless you do a certain amount of deconstruction, which will require a certain amount of investigation.
That's a good point.
But
also, we actually do have to do that deconstruction in order to get here now. We have to wake up. We have to gladden the mind. We have to start looking at what's going on, do some investigation, taking that deep breath, and all of that kind of brings us into the here now.
Yeah.
Because the here now is generally a whole lot bigger. I mean, you can understand even when someone wakes up in the morning, they wake up only just gradually a little bit. It takes a little while to become fully awake. Yeah. Okay. That same thing is also true about being in the here now, that it's actually a process of gradually waking up out of the past future system of hindrance into the here now. It also has the quality of how open can we get. I think we lost our
video.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
all right. So
it's back.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
So, open. In fact, be here now is not a state; it's a process of opening.
Yeah. Filling in the moat, taking down the banner.
Okay. Yes. In fact, that's correct. And so, by filling in the mode and destroying the banner, that means that we're not identifying with things. Because whenever we identify with anything, it's generally always in the past. In other words, I'm unlikely to identify right now with Republicans for the very first time. Normally, people who identify with Republicans have done that over and over and over and over and over again. So being a Republican is not just in the past, it's also a habit now. And so the likelihood of them to hear something nice that's happened to the Democrats and they like it because it sounds good is very low, because they'll immediately, I'm a Republican, therefore I don't like what happens good to the Democrats. So that's a kind of sleepness. They actually, generally, when they have that attitude, they're not really even listening very closely to the news anyway. They're not really paying attention to what's going on because they've already got a position that they've taken.
All they're doing is scanning for something to confirm the bias.
Exactly. That's why they call it confirmation bias. We're looking for a way to confirm what we already believe.
People can do that though in all, like I notice I do that when I'm sometimes when I'm reading, or if I'm online and I'm looking at something related to the Dharma or practice, I will. It's like a process of, like, I will scan it to see if it confirms the kind of opinions, beliefs, and biases that I have. You know, we can. It's easy to kind of say, "Oh, that's what people do in politics," but actually, if I'm being honest, I do the same thing around practice.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we do. We look for things that we agree with that's already there, but occasionally we're open to something new.
Yeah.
And the more we remember to be open, then the more likely we are to be open to something new, as opposed to trying to put our past on this new object so that we can understand it.
Yes. But then even that, interestingly, that's a habit to get into, right? It's a habit to get into being open-minded and to not constantly needing the present moment to confirm something about your views or your identity or your past. That's a habit.
Exactly so.
What?
You're exactly right. So
Yeah.
it's a habit to be developed of being open, to be here now.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's actually the very definition of sati.
Yeah.
To wake up.
Yeah.
That's our number one goal. That's our number one skill to be developed, is to wake up, to open up. And we learn to open more and more and more so that we become more fully open. That's also a process of awakening.
Yes.
If we don't wake up fully woken up, we wake up in gradual stages. That happens when we wake up in the morning. It happens when we wake up immediately, when we recognize, aha, I see you, Mara. That's actually a little process that's going on in the mind. You wouldn't believe how fast the mind is, and like that. It's just all over the place. It's a really shaky tool. And so getting that mind to settle down is a good, useful tool.
A hell of a lot needs to happen to do that aha, I see you process.
Well, imagine this. The human brain is possibly the most complex item in the universe. That's how complex it is. They say that the number of neuron connections are far, far, far greater than the number of stars in all of the galaxies.
Yeah, it's astonishing.
That is like unbelievably complex. And so all of these things are happening in there, but that also means that we do have the space to change. Neurons grow, neurons die, new pathways are formed, and the whole human brain is a process of reconfiguring itself so long as we keep learning.
So it's like emptiness on a kind of neurological level, right? That is...
That's a way of saying it. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We're always really empty.
And fluid and able to create, recreate, die, create, recreate, die on a kind of like endless...
And yet we somehow got stuck into a pattern, possibly because that was the easy way at that time. And so we developed always the easy way out. And so this is the issue that we have to bring up is that, well, what is right effort? Because we actually do have to take an effort to get ourselves out of the rut we're in. And so we have to, but it's because we keep getting ourselves back into those ruts, that means we have to each time take the right effort to get ourselves out of that rut, which basically means to stop getting into the rut of the past and take the effort that it takes to be here now, to keep coming back and coming back. And by doing so, we're developing a marvelous skill to be present, to be here now, to wake up, to see what's going on, to investigate, and to begin to feel the way we want to feel, as opposed to feeling the way that we are in the habit of feeling. And so this, go ahead.
Understanding that I suppose it's like you could call it the law of cause and effect, or you could call it karma. It's like understanding that what arises depends on what has come before, and that invites a kind of understanding of like that plasticity or emptiness, the potential fluidity of self and experience.
Exactly true. Exactly so. The whole quality of sunyata or emptiness comes from the perspective of, you probably heard anicca uh, 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 sabbe. Sabbe sankara anicca. Sabbe um, uh, sankara dukkha. And then sabbe Dhamma anatta. What we're really getting at is that there's no core anywhere, not just no core in any of the sankharas or the put together things that fall back apart, but that there is no core within anything. There's no self. An example of that is gold is actually empty.
Mm-hmm.
It's empty of value.
Mm-hmm.
There's no value in gold. And yet, look how much value it has on the open market.
Mm-hmm.
$2,500 an ounce the last time we looked, okay? Why? The only thing about gold there is that it's soft, it's heavy, it's, some people think that it's pretty, it's malleable, you can make jewelry out of it, like who needs jewelry?
Yeah.
But the point of it is now they find out that it's an excellent conductor of electricity, and that it doesn't rot away, and that's why they use it as industrial stuff in computers, is because it's a really good conductor of electricity, and it also has a very low melting point. And so they use it as solder. And then the solder itself is subject to acid rain. With the tin and the lead, that will decompose, but gold connections don't rust. And so it's got a great industrial use, but they don't use it very often because it's so dang expensive.
Yeah.
If they dug up all the gold out of the ground that they dug up and put it to industrial use, that would be, I mean, the industry would use all of it. But no, more than half of the stuff goes into the gold reserves and jewelry stores and gold buying and hoarding of gold.
Yeah.
Why? Why?
Yeah. Well, the South. There's a really interesting kind of vignette in the history of money, because obviously the idea of gold as having this value is clearly empty, clearly absurd. There's a South Sea island, or in the South Sea Islands they have these statues of these big heads,
Yes.
and they are
Easter Island.
Yeah, similar to they're worth that they're considered like extremely valuable, and it's like an enormous gift would be from one island to give another island. They would sail over with the head and they would give it as a head, and they obviously have no real value, but people will give livestock, fishing rights,
right.
all this like stuff for the ownership of that head. And there's a story about a head that sunk as it was going from one island to the other island. And they arrived at the other island and they were like, "I'm so sorry, there was a storm and the head sunk." And they basically decided it didn't matter. Like who owns the head at the bottom of the sea is still just as important and valuable as a head that's on land.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That solved the problem. Somebody was wise when they got the villagers to agree that, well, you own that statue. Sorry, it's in the drink, but it's yours.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose the question I kind of keep coming back to, and I do have to go in a minute. What time is it? How many minutes past the hour do you make it?
It's 57 minutes past the hour.
Yeah, I
So
got a
we're
couple of minutes. But the kind of thing which I'm constantly coming back to is it's all kind of coming. The kind of what's the word I'm looking for? The phrase I'm looking for, like the playground in meditation, or the area of learning, the kind of edge, right? Like of where I'm exploring in meditation. And it's really interesting actually experimenting with a different method and seeing how it's ultimately the same thing. It's just a different way of getting there. And actually that is helpful, I feel, because it slightly turns down my attachment to a specific method. Do you know what I mean? But I suppose the question I constantly come back to, and I'm constantly trying, and I'm using as a way of kind of embedding, or as a kind of sati bell in life, is just like how to live from the wisdom of those states. Sort of like how coming back from this unsticky, fluid, dynamic, boundless sense of self, then how it's like how to bring that joy and that fluidity and that lightness and that openness with me into my relationship to work, into my relationship with my children, into the way I see my dad.
I understand.
Yeah.
Number one, we have already covered this.
Yes.
Number two, we need to cover it again. Number three is going to take longer than we have right now to cover that, and that's okay. It's an excuse for you to call next time.
Yeah, I don't need an excuse. It's too much fun to need an
excuse. Okay, Matt. Well, thanks for your help, and I hear that you put that. Does it actually come up as a spreadsheet?
Yes, it comes as a spreadsheet. It's on there.
I'm impressed. Great.
Thanks, Dhammarato.
Okay, thank you. We'll see you.
Go well.
Okay, let's see if we can do it that way.